If you've looked at a complex watercolor painting and wondered if it could morph into a heavily textured queen-size quilt, the answer is absolutely yes. But right away, you will run into some serious physical obstacles. A painting like this is full of hundreds of tiny, irregular shapes, dense leaf clusters, and incredibly soft color transitions. Your first instinct might be to use traditional piecing, trying to cut and sew a tiny fabric polygon for every single leaf and shadow. That approach will quickly lead to burnout and an impossibly complicated project. Instead, we need to shift our mindset entirely. We are going to be painting with fabric, using a technique called fused appliqué. By bypassing traditional piecing altogether, an intermediate quilter can build a highly detailed, realistic landscape without losing their mind in the process. To pull this off, you need a few specific tools. Gather a supply of fusible web, textured batik fabrics, and a free motion sewing machine. Before you make a single cut, you also need to establish a strict physical constraint. Do not attempt to stretch your appliqué landscape edge to edge across an entire queen-size bed. Instead, restrict your central art panel to a manageable width of about 60 to 70 inches. Controlling the scale of that central appliqué panel keeps your total workload manageable, and it prevents the architectural details of the house from distorting under their own weight. The first actual step in the workflow is visual simplification. You have to reduce thousands of individual brushstrokes down into major structural regions: the sky, the house, and the lawn. You also need to drastically reduce the color palette. Where the original painting might have 50 distinct shades of green, you should choose perhaps 5 core tones to represent the light and shadow. Looking at this side-by-side layout, you can see the original watercolor on the left, next to a simplified, posterized digital rendering on the right. The impression of the house remains completely intact, even with blocked colors. Now you have to scale that simplified design up to fit your 60 to 70-inch central panel format. You can do this by using a digital projector to beam the image directly onto a design wall, or by printing large black and white engineering prints at a copy shop and taping them together to create a full-size tracing template. By simplifying the regions and colors right at the start, you shift the burden of detail away from cutting tiny pieces of cloth and onto the natural textures of the fabric itself. When it is time to build, assemble the quilt from back to front, organizing the scene into 3 distinct planes. You start with the background layer. These are your largest, simplest shapes, dropping the sky, the broad stretch of lawn, and the driveway onto your blank canvas. Next comes the middle layer. The structural elements of the house, the windows, and the stone walls are placed directly on top of the background. Finally, you add the top layer. The tree canopies, overlapping branches, and foreground shrubs fit into the scene, crossing over both the house and the background. The physical mechanics of fused appliqué make this progression straightforward. Trace a shape onto fusible paper, iron it to the fabric, cut out the specific region, and fuse it securely. Working back to front naturally creates forced perspective and depth, giving you a 3-dimensional landscape without having to calculate a single interlocking seam. When assembling that top landscaping layer, you will hit the most common point of failure. It is very tempting to try and cut out individual leaves. The artistic solution is to use large cuts of heavily modeled, highly textured green batik fabrics to suggest a full tree canopy. The human eye naturally blends layered, complex fabric textures together. It creates the illusion of thousands of leaves without you having to manually build them. You simply fuse these large, irregular, leaf-textured shapes directly over the background and the house structure to complete the landscape. Trusting the organic textures woven into the fabric itself replaces the need for microscopic precision with your scissors. Once the fabric shapes are fused, you can bridge the gap between your simplified patterns and the original watercolor by using a technique called thread painting. By setting your sewing machine for free motion quilting, you can move the fabric manually. Your needle acts exactly like a sketch pen drawing directly over the fused appliqué. You can target specific areas with your thread to add the lost resolution back in. Stitch individual window panes, define rough stone wall edges, and build dense thread shadows. Up in the canopy blocks, thread lines carve out distinct branches and add the impression of wind and leaf movement across the flat fabric. Thread painting permanently anchors all those overlapping applique layers together, while providing the high-resolution realism that simply cannot be achieved with fabric shapes alone. Now, you still have that original size constraint to resolve. You have a finished 60 to 70-inch central art panel, but you need a full 90 by 90-inch queen bed quilt. The final step is to sew traditional fabric borders around the outside edges of your completed applique centerpiece. These borders serve a dual purpose. They act like a matting, framing the landscape exactly like a gallery painting, while also adding the necessary physical width and length to cover the bed. And the breathtaking final result is a massive, beautiful, queen-sized landscape quilt that drapes perfectly over the mattress. By combining simplified shapes with layered fabric fusing and detailed thread painting, you gain the ability to scale complex fine art into practical, large-scale textile pieces.